Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're talking about something I think a lot of us feel, that exhausting, persistent sense that you just feel too much. And we're going to completely redefine it. We're making the case that it's not a personal flaw, not some kind of weakness, but actually a sophisticated and often exploited form of labor.
That's it, exactly.
Our sources get into this really paradigm-shifting idea. Sensitivity isn't just a personality trait, it's a resource.
Yeah, a resource the world actively consumes.
Exactly. What we call hyper-empathy is described as continuous, unpaid, unchosen work. It's like having a full-body scanning system we never asked for that's always on.
And you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we have to stop thinking about empathy as this, gentle virtue.
Right.
We need to analyze it as a social technology.
Right.
A tool that's been deployed inside hierarchies to maintain power. Our mission is to trace its history, how it's been gendered, its colonial roots, and then, and this is key, we're going to see how autistic hyperempathy just completely challenges that old, tired narrative about it being a deficit.
So the goal here for you listening is to get the language to shift your own story. To understand why your own sensitivity is so often mistaken for a flaw, and how seeing it as a skill, that's the first step toward sovereignty. It's about owning your own internal world.
It really is.
So let's start with that feeling, the experience our sources describe. They talk about some people being porous.
Not fragile, but permeable.
Yes, exactly. Permeable. You're instinctively tracking the weather inside other people's bodies. It's unconscious. You feel the tension in a room, the stress someone is carrying, and suddenly you're carrying it too. These are emotions that don't even belong to you.
And that capacity, that attunement, it immediately gets turned into labor. It often starts right in our families.
Oh, absolutely.
This skill gets, sort of rebranded as a convenience. Who's the one who always smooths things over at family dinners?
The mediator.
The mediator, the colleague who senses the boss, is having a bad day before anyone else. That person becomes a buffer, and it's just so expected, naturalized, and taken for granted that the work itself just vanishes.
That invisibility is the whole point.
Yeah.
If it's invisible, it's not work. It's just who you are.
Precisely. And that's where the cost comes in. Because when that constant emotional labor leads to burnout, when the sensitive person finally has to pull back or set a boundary, they're immediately told the problem is you.
You're being too sensitive.
You're overreacting. The world blames their sensitivity instead of the ridiculous amount of labor they were drafted into.
Yeah.
The whole system runs on you feeling guilty for being exhausted.
That completely flips the script from personal failing to, systemic exploitation.
It does.
And the sources are clear. This is not a new thing. Empathy has always lived inside power.
If we look at the big picture, historically, empathy is way more than a feeling. It's a tool for governance, for control. Colonial regimes, for instance, they weaponize it through something called selective compassion.
Selective compassion. That sounds chilling. How did that actually work?
Well, it was the moral cover story for domination.
Yeah.
The colonizer would frame it as a civilizing mission.
Yeah.
Bringing order.
Right, for their own good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'd show empathy only to those who played by their rules, and that compassion was used to justify dehumanizing anyone who resisted. But even more than that, they forced the colonized into what the sources call effective servitude.
Effective servitude. What does that mean in practice?
It means you are expected to soothe the conscience of your own oppressor, to absorb the violence and trauma quietly, patiently, to basically manage the emotional fallout of your own oppression so the person harming you could feel comfortable.
Wow. That mirrors so perfectly what happened in the domestic sphere with the feminization of care.
A perfect mirror. Emotional availability was systematically coded as women's work, and then the real genius move was declaring it innate.
Of course.
If it's just instinct, if it's natural, then you don't have to pay for it, you don't have to support it, it's not labor, it's just there.
And we see this in institutions today, right? In places like hospitals.
Well, absolutely. There's research that shows how empathy and disempathy are arranged along lines of status. Power flows to the people who are permitted to withdraw, the managers, the administrators. They can be detached.
While the actual work of caring.
Heavy lifting, the comforting, the absorbing of fear and pain, that all pools around those with the lowest status. It's a clear map of whose feelings matter and who has to do the feeling for everyone else.
So when you put it all together, the outcome is it's just devastatingly clear. Once empathy is just an expectation, it becomes this invisible, exploitable labor taken from people who were never, ever given the choice to say no.
Never.
Okay, this is where the analysis gets really specific because we have to talk about what our sources call the lie at the heart of autism discourse.
Mm.
This idea of the empathy deficit. We're all taught that autistic people lack empathy, but the argument here is that for many, the reality is the exact opposite. They don't lack it, they drown in it.
Yes. They experience a kind of hyper-empathy that's intense, involuntary, often overwhelming.
And what's fascinating is the distinction they make about how it works.
It's a different kind of attunement. For many autistic people, empathy is this deep, precise, embodied resonance.
What does that mean, embodied?
It means they're reading the tiny signals, a shift in tone, a change in breathing, the rhythm of speech. They're not just decoding the surface choreography of social cues. They're reading the emotional infrastructure underneath.
That makes perfect sense. So they're not struggling with the emotion itself, they're struggling to translate neurotypical social rules.
Exactly. And that mismatch creates what's called the double empathy problem. But here's the crucial point. The cost, the labor of translating and absorbing and adjusting is almost always put on the autistic person. That mismatch becomes an extraction point.
Which leads right into this idea of the empathy pipeline.
Tell us about that.
Because that hyperattunement is so accurate, it gets misread by everyone else as just being available. So it channels autistic people into these very specific roles.
The mediator again.
The mediator, the good listener, the person who fixes everything. And it doesn't feel like a choice. The sources say it feels like an inevitability. The world sees a personality trait, but from the inside, it's a system you're trapped in.
So if it's so draining, the question becomes, why comply? Why keep doing it?
Right.
And the answer really is survival. It's a survival tool. That intense pattern sensing helps you predict things, helps you avoid impact. Because for many sensitive people, especially autistic people, sensory disharmony like conflict, raised voices, it can feel like physical pain.
I've heard that. It's an actual sensory assault.
It is. So it's often less overwhelming to manage everyone else's feelings than to endure the chaos that happens when you don't. It's not about being nice. It's self-preservation.
And this exploitation, it's not happening in a vacuum. The sources place it in a long, violent lineage of coerced relational labor.
It's so important to make that connection.
The claim is very specific. For centuries, Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and colonized women were assigned the work of emotional smoothing, of containment. They were treated as convenient containers for everyone else's emotions. Their job was to catch the fallout so others could stay comfortable.
And while the histories of oppression are, of course, not the same, the sources argue that autistic people enter this same genealogy through a shared positionality at the margins.
Meaning they're outside the center of neurotypical power.
Exactly, and that makes them vulnerable to the same structures that always assign care downward. The world literally builds its comfort on the quiet labor of those at the bottom of the social ladder.
And that framework helps us understand what's called the coercion trap. Empathy stops being about connection and becomes coercion through 1,000 small expectations. Because everyone relies on your labor, the moment you try to withdraw, it's treated as betrayal or cruelty.
The irony is it's brutal. The same world that demanded your softness, your availability.
The world that leaned on you.
That very same world turns on you in a second and calls you cold or unreasonable the moment you finally pull back. You're punished for setting a boundary you never had the choice to set in the first place.
This is such a powerful framework. So we have to talk about solutions. How do we start reclaiming this power?
Well, the first step is a mental one. It's recognizing empathy, not as this obligation you were born with, but as expertise.
Expertise, I like that.
A skilled, situated way of knowing. It's a craft you hone to survive. It's a professional level skill, and you have to start treating it that way.
And if we do that, what does a post-extraction empathy world even look like?
It doesn't mean a world without care. It means all people carry care differently.
A shared responsibility.
Exactly. Care becomes a shared architecture that we maintain through reciprocity, not through the sacrifice of a few. Nobody gets a medal for burning themselves out for others.
Which brings us to boundaries. That's the practical tool here. The sources say first, redistribute the labor. Remember that not every crisis is ours to manage.
So important.
And second, and I love this idea, we have to reclaim opacity.
Opacity. That sounds a bit academic. Let's break that down.
How would you explain that in a really tangible way?
Reclaiming opacity is the right to an inner life that is not public property.
Ooh.
It is the right to feel your feelings, anger, sadness, whatever, without having to immediately translate it or justify it for someone else's comfort. Your internal weather system belongs to you. You don't owe anyone a forecast.
That is the ultimate boundary, isn't it? The right to not be legible to everyone.
It is. And those boundaries are what turn empathy from an extracted resource back into real voluntary connection.
And this all leads to sovereignty.
Yes, to sovereignty. Your
Yes.
sensitivity becomes a resource that you manage, that you steward for yourself and for the people you choose. It is no longer a public utility others can tap at will.
Your attunement is seen as a strength, but it's never demanded as a service.
It's an offering, not an obligation.
I mean, this deep dive has just completely reframed sensitivity. We've gone from seeing it as a personal flaw, as a way you're broken, to understanding it as this incredibly potent, exploited form of labor that has kept families and companies and even empires running.
And as we close, I think we have to honor that vast, unbroken lineage of carers whose invisible work held everything together.
Yes.
The women, the racialized communities, the autistic people, whose empathy and attunement absorb so much of the world's pain.
So the final takeaway for you listening is this. Empathy is not servitude. It's a skill, a powerful one. Wield it with discernment. Protect it. The radical claim we want to leave you with is that your interior life, your attention, your emotional energy, it all belongs to you.
And that leads to a final thought. If we actually commit to this idea of post-extraction empathy, what happens? How would our workplaces, our friendships, our families fundamentally change if all emotional responsibility was based purely on reciprocity and choice instead of history and expectation?
Yeah.
Just imagine a world where everyone, truly everyone, had to carry their own emotional weight. That is the world we have to start building.